Hello, everyone. We are joined by Toria Coates and also Omara Gonzalez, and we're excited to be hosting this second series of several series that we're tackling the issue of forgiveness. So, this is Release and Rise. And today we're going to talk about one of the hardest steps in forgiveness, and that is finding empathy after deep hurt. But before we dive into this crucial topic, I'd love to just take a minute and make introductions again. If this is your first time joining us, we're with Family Bridges. We'd love for you to connect with us in all our social media platforms. Make sure you follow us for engaging topics like this. We're all about ending the cycle of family trauma through innovative programs that empower, encourage, and equip. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working for more than 20 years in the clinical setting, but also bringing community-based approaches to churches, schools, communities where people are at on areas of mental health, leadership, and marriage and family life. And Toria and Omira are with the Family Bridges team, and they bring their sets of strength and stories and impact to our work. And so I would love for you ladies to just a quick introduction and specifically share why this topic of forgiveness is important for you. It's of value. Would love for you to share that to get us going. We'll start with Omira.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Omar Gonzalez. And for nearly 2 decades, I worked in operations at Family Bridges and Bridges Excel. My favorite part of my job is helping others do theirs. They're just removing those barriers, nurturing that growth, and celebrating the impact that we make together. And usually, when people ask me, how would you describe yourself? I always say, I'm a creator, I'm an encourager, and I just love people building. Why forgiveness is such an important topic. I think at some point we all cross roads where we have to forgive someone, right? Or we need to be forgiven. And understanding what forgiving someone does for us, it's liberating. It really is liberating, and in so many levels. But it starts somewhere, and it starts with the choice. And so personally, I benefit from both, and so this is why this is a very powerful topic, and I'm so glad that we're able to have this opportunity to talk about this.
Thank you, Omira. Toria?
Well, great afternoon. So I am new to Family Bridges. Started about, I'd say it's almost 10 months, maybe at this point. But what I love by being the development director is really building those connections. And we are all about building resilient families and building the community where it talks about relationships. And that's really for a couple of decades that I have really championed in my personal businesses and companies that I've worked with, a lot of nonprofits. And I've had the joy of helping to cultivate those relationships with our supporters, with the community, as well as with families and individuals. And, loving the fact that when we're talking about topics like this of forgiveness and how we further dive into that, really seeing how we first forgive ourselves for things, maybe things or hurts or wrongs in our past, or even how we forgive those loved ones or people. It's so important to continue to have those deep conversations. So I'm so happy today to just further that discussion and see where we go.
Thank you, Toria. And right after this conversation, I'll invite Toria to chime in again and talk about the ambassador program and what that is, how people can get involved, what we're doing this year, which is really fantastic. So to talk a little bit about this model, last time, the first session, would encourage you to if you have not listened to it, to dive in and listen to that. We'll make sure to post a link. But we dived into this model called Reach, and it's developed by a really well-known psychologist, um, Christian counselor, Everett Worthington, and he talks about Reach, and it's this model that looks at forgiveness through a process. which requires decisions across different areas. And that first is being intentional about recapping the story of hurt and being able to recall it, acknowledge it, looking at it, listening to it, understanding it. That's easier said than done. And a lot of times we get stuck in pain cycles, um, and we don't want to relive the experience of pain. So we do what we do best a lot of times, which is deny that pain, try to push it aside, try to put it in a very big vault, tie the key of that vault, and hope and pray that it will just, be buried. And what I have seen in clinical work is that for some people that may work for a while, and over the years, that pain and the struggle comes back either through psychosomatic symptoms, which is just a physical pain, uh, headaches, diabetes, heart problems, all sorts of problems. And the body keeps score. There's that famous book, but it's just the idea of our body starts breaking down. And also emotionally, all of these feelings start kind of coming up to the surface, and relationships also start breaking down. And so denying it, pushing it aside, or all these coping mechanisms often leave us short, and they disappoint, and they end up creating more hurt and more pain. So pretending that circumstances and situations, don't didn't impact us is not the way to go. It's unhealthy. Denying the pain is unhealthy. And so last time that we discussed, we talk about going there, looking at the situation, diving in and telling that story. Now, there's all sorts of difficulties that we can all experience, and it could be a little slight. And, I always remember my mom who would say, "You don't want to make a mountain out of molehill," right? Like there's little slights that, in your family life that people may say things or at work. And you might just decide quickly to just forgive and move on and not carry it too much weight to what they say or do. There's beyond slights, there's also repeated experiences that really assault the soul, really are damaging, really are hurtful, and they're painful, and it's kind of like a wound, right? That you keep scabbing at it and keep
Mm.
scabbing at it, and it creates deep. It becomes really, really serious, and so family members, even and coworkers, can unintentionally and intentionally do that. Do things that are just really harmful to you, and that you can carry that on. And then there's experiences that are just horrific, and they're you think of hard to reach places, or just difficult experiences that people have had, that are external, that are just unbelievable, traumatic events that are just evil, right? And they can happen either by other forces at work in the world, just evil. It could be, family members too that could do that, unfortunately. So there's all sorts of levels, if you will, of intensity of experiences that we have, that forgiveness plays a role, and the process of being able to enter into that generous spirit of being able to extend forgiveness, whether it's for a slight or whether it's experience that requires more work, is really intentional. And it starts with what we talked about last week, which was taking a look at that situation, taking a hard look at it, and exposing it for what it is. And one of the ways that we do that is going to a therapist. At times we have to do that, go to a counselor, um, going to even a pastoral counselor, um, just someone that we can, if you will, confess the experience and share it, and that they can hold it, carry it with us as we process that experience. That's a valuable part of that. Another really important element of telling the story is journaling. And I know, Omira, you're a definite promoter of journaling, so I'll pass it on to you just to share a little bit how journaling, those emotions, those experiences, those stories are really powerful.
Yeah, You're right. Journaling has been very powerful for my own life. For those that are watching or even listening, the idea of empathy can feel very impossible sometimes when we're thinking about forgiveness. It just can feel so impossible. And then to think about that level of empathy towards those people that hurt us, that feels hard. And so maybe you've been deeply wounded, whether, like Alicia said, by a parent, a spouse, a friend, or even a leader that you trusted. You're probably thinking, why should I? Why should I even try to understand someone who hurt me? And that's fair. I mean, you're allowed to ask that. Because forgiveness is not always about pretending that the pain never happened, that we didn't go through that. It's really about beginning to heal what was left, right? And so what I use multiple tools, but the one that has worked greatly for me and I have found it to be freeing is journaling. It just gives me permission to be honest, to put into words what I feel without filtering it or even feeling guilty. Um, for me, journaling has become a way to even think things through, to process things, to sit with my emotions instead of just running away from them. Um, Journaling is really between like you and a piece of paper. As I've always said, it's like this place where you have a piece of paper and a pen, and it's so safe to be angry. You can be heartbroken, you can be messy, it can be real, and you can write what you've been carrying for too long. You don't have to worry about being judged. So you get to name the weight, the disappointment, the grief, how you were hurt. And sometimes in that space of journaling, that's all you need to do to start, because journaling can sometimes, and it has been for me, the first crack of light in an already dark room.
It's beautiful. The first crack of light in an already dark room. Truth sets us free. So there is something about being able to expose the truth of what's going on, and all the emotions that might be conflicting, that you might be experiencing. A part of you might be feeling completely caring, loving, if it's someone that you trust and love, while another part of you is struggling with anger, frustration, disappointment. Being able to put that in paper helps sort out all of that anguish. You alluded, Omara, to a second element, which is empathy, and that takes us to that second step. So that first step is just putting it out there, exposing the truth of the story and not denying it. And today we want to spend a little bit more time focusing on empathy. And that, what are you talking about? Empathy for yourself, shortly, yes. But empathy also in terms of trying to understand the situation from the other person's perspective and to see their reason. So that's very, very big, and incredibly hard to do. I can think, we're in the space of marriage and family life. And I mean, how many, have found themselves with a little fight with their spouses, or an angst, even with your kids. You might be angry at them because they disobeyed you and they didn't follow suit. And you first can recoil in that. And I've remembered several times having an argument with my husband and walking outside to just kind of vent. And what originally comes to my head is, oh, why is he doing that? Why did he say that? Right. And you just kind of can fall prey to the script of negativity because of the circumstance that's happened to you. And you can obviously justify the pain and what your needs are. And it's important to go there and explore, why am I upset? What's going on in my heart? Why is this bothering so much? You could stay there though, and you can let that take hold of your heart for a long time. And the shift is, once you process where you are, to then explore where your spouse is in the context of this example that I'm giving. So being able to say, well, what is my husband coming from? Where, why does he think this things? And that, right, is that step of empathy. Now, and pride gets in the way. It's hard because we have our big ego, like, I have to think about this in the context of the other, and what they're going through. In more egregious situations, perhaps, that are more abusive, that are painful, that it's just hard to do. And I want to caveat that empathy doesn't mean tolerating, excusing, permitting, allowing the person to continue. It's trying to understand, what that experience is. Toria, why do you think, yeah, that empathy is so hard, but it is so important in the process of forgiveness?
Well, one of the things that I believe when we think about empathy is sometimes when we can't, especially if we're conversating or communicating with someone, we sometimes get so caught up in our own point or the thing that we're trying to communicate that we really can't hear what the other person is saying or why they may have responded in that way. And I think empathy is so important because sometimes we don't even know what the other person, what hurt or harm or past emotions or feelings that that individual may have gone through, right? Which might have caused them to respond in a certain way, right? Empathy is really saying that while in forgiveness, while I may not understand why you did this, right? You hurt my expectations. Empathy allows me to see past what happened, to see maybe where is that coming from. And it leads us to understanding the person, maybe it's a family member or a friend or someone, seeing past the circumstance. And that's the first way that I believe empathy really is helpful. It allows us to reach beyond instead of
Omar,
just get
yeah,
circumstance.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's good. Omara, can you add a little bit more to that in terms of, someone that has experienced abusive experiences, painful circumstances? How can they begin to understand the perspective of the offender without minimizing or invalidating their own pain?
Yeah, sure. I can't, without disclosing too much, I can't even put myself in those shoes, right? Because, as a young person, I remember carrying quite a lot of anger and hate and hurt from certain circumstances that I faced in my own personal life. I mean, sometimes they came from people that we loved and we had high expectations of. And when they fell short and I was left wounded, I held on to that pain for too long. And so there comes a point where you have to just think about, like, what kind of person do you want to be, right? And I knew that going into motherhood and being a wife and a friend, that would require me to really acknowledge where that hurt was coming from. And that was really difficult to do because, as we said many times, it's not easy to sit there and really think about where this pain actually initiated from, because then you have to, like, think about the whole thing. But what shifted me towards that moment of freedom was understanding that this person who had hurt me was also someone who had been deeply hurt themselves. And so they, at some point, had carried their own history of rejection. They carried their own pain, they carried their own emotional wounds. And so I began to see that they couldn't even give me what they had never received. Does that make sense? Because
Mhm.
that realization didn't excuse their actions, because it doesn't excuse their actions, right? But it helped me see them through just a different lens. And it's that one more
Mhm.
of, instead of resentment, which is usually, where we sometimes sit for a very long time, it kind of converted into more of a spirit of compassion. And that was my moment of transformation, right? It was like, I went through a mind shift from blaming to understanding. Because when we recognize that people often usually act from their pain or their fear or their own brokenness, that weight of their offense, it starts to loosen its grip on us. It did for me. It loosened the grip when I finally had that mind shift. So empathy, or in this case, right, it doesn't make the wrong right, but it gave me at least a softer place to land. And so I was able to move from, how could they do this to me? I felt safe with you and this happened to what happened to them, And that very subtle shift from judgment to understanding, at least for me, talking out of my own experience, is where my healing began. Because by using empathy as a tool, it didn't excuse it, it just helped explain it. And it didn't erase my pain, it just allowed it to give it more context.
That is so powerful. You said so many valuable insights in there. Go back and listen to everything Amara just shared again. Thank you so much for sharing of your own experience, but just the
Yeah.
shift that happens. It's it's
Yes.
subtle, but it's so powerful. I just want you to listen to what she said again, just being able to go from blame, vengeance seeking,
Yes.
that could really then create contempt, and it's very toxic and weighty. And so you're basically beating yourself up twice. You had the experience of abuse, and now by continuing to regurgitate that negative experience, then you are then harboring the consequences even further because you're continuing to just regurgitate on that negativity. But shifting from blame, right, to empathy, just to understand, to be curious is a powerful step. And in order for you to have empathy, in some cases, it means having a lot of questions about the other person that did this. You can't always do that. And I understand that in this conversation, we're being really general, and there's all sorts of experiences that um, obviously have varying
Mhm.
degrees of difficulty. And, we can't cookie cutter every experience. One of the things, for example, one of the experiences that I have seen a lot is in the context of unfaithfulness in marriage, for example, where a husband and wife decide to reconcile, and um, the it takes two to tango, right? We understand that there's all sorts of elements and experiences that both have had that contributed, perhaps, for one person to do this unfaithfulness, whether it's emotional, in all its various forms. But the one spouse has a lot of questions, might have a ton of questions, and these questions may be there might be a moment of peace, and then they come back at different cycles and at different times. And so there's that curiosity, like, what happened? I need to understand. I need to explore that. And in a sense, that helps that person understand the what and where, but also, like, why did this occur? Like, right, being able to understand and have empathy for the other. So
Mhm.
um, I understand unfaithfulness is a whole other can of worms that we could have a whole series talking about that, but that's one that what's just one example of how important it is to be curious. And so I'm going to toss it over to you, Toria, to talk about curiosity and how to be empathic. Sometimes we did need to explore and be curious about the other story.
I th- so what I believe is when we are in a relationship with somebody, and in speaking of curiosity, it really helps us to get to that understanding. It really allows us to explore a little bit deeper and have not just look at it at the layer, but what is actually happening. And it may come out with asking questions. I know for myself, and I do have to like calm myself a little bit, especially when I'm talking to my husband, like not just drill him with a whole bunch of questions because that doesn't work, so
Oh,
it's
you
not
don't want to be a detective.
wait a minute, what happened? And then you just have, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden 10 questions come to mind. But it really is coming from a place of, when you are empathetic, you are coming from a place of, I want to understand. And it's not in a way of accusing, because the hurt or the pain may still be there, but to understand, how do we get there, to get the understanding so that we can heal moving forward. And that is almost like a curious approach of saying, you know what, I don't know how this happened, but I still would like to know, and give you the opportunity to really say where you're coming from. And then we both can have understanding, because they may already understand the why, but just being really curious and just asking the questions, or giving the person the opportunity to respond. There's a lot of great things in that. And also that gives grace, because I feel like
Mm,
grace is a big part of empathy, meaning that we do understand that everyone is imperfect, but through that grace, I can explore and try to understand more.
yeah, absolutely. Omira, how does prayer play into this? Because I think it's just really hard for us in terms of our human limitations to have the capacity to shift and go from, maybe a heart of vengeance or frustration or anger or bitterness, et cetera, to, okay, I'm going to try to appreciate where the other person is coming from and what's going on in their story.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great question. It's funny because I can't answer the question without sharing a little bit about how I personally experienced that, and then how prayer was a big part of how that helped me get through that. But I
Yeah.
also know that, I cannot always remember very specific moments, right? Like if I sit there and I try to remember a specific moment, it doesn't usually come or surface right away. But I do remember the patterns I used to use. And so I when I was young, I was a firecracker, guys. I mean, if you hurt me, you were gonna feel it back. So my mindset was like, if you slap me on one cheek, I'm gonna punch you on the other. And now I laugh about that because I know that that was driven, by hurt, pride, and a lot of immaturity. And so I also believe that when someone would hurt me, if I held on to it, it was like my armor. And I would tell myself that staying angry meant staying safe. But honestly, the only person it was destroying me was me. So eventually,
Mm,
when the weight became too heavy to carry, I take it to God. And that was a process in itself. I had to release it piece by piece, not all at once, but piece by piece, right? And sometimes I would be crying. I mean, I would be like a blubbering mess in the bathroom, just crying my heart out, asking God, to help me. Sometimes it was wrestling, with those moments. And sometimes I just sat there in silence, and just kind of looked up or just closed my eyes. But over time, I just started to realize something through those moments of prayer, that holding on to that pain wasn't really protecting me. It was really preventing me from becoming who I wanted to be, the person I wanted to be. And so, prayer, when I think about prayer, um, I can't tell you the many times that I had locked myself in the bathroom, sat on that floor, and had that, that ugly cry, like the why moments, the anger, the blame. And it was in that level of honesty with God is where I felt my healing began. Because here's what I know about God is that He welcomes it. He's not afraid of your ugly. He's not afraid of your mess. He wants to hear how you really, really feel. He wants to hear your raw emotions, your doubts, your frustrations, and He sees you and He loves you right there in the middle of that mess. And so, through prayer, when you pour it all out to Him and you ask Him to show you what forgiveness means to Him, God cares because He sees the whole story. He doesn't just see one thing. He sees the injustice, He sees the ache, He sees the confusion, and He longs for you to be free, not to be chained to some memory of someone else's sin. I love the verse where it says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and He saves those who are crushed in spirit." So forgiveness
mm.
matters because your heart matters to Him. So
Wow,
that's prayer
your heart
for me.
matters to Him, and it does indeed. And thank you so much for being vulnerable and just sharing that rawness and how valuable that is to be able to just bear all to the feet of Jesus and what that has meant for you. Um, just I'm looking at the time here, but I have just a couple more questions that I'd love to pass on to both of you because this is hard step to be empathic. And the question is, can empathy just coexist? I mean, it's a tension that needs to happen. And so how can you, in that stage or in that process of forgiveness, move forward, even in circumstances when restitution never comes? Toria?
So I think one of the things is that sometimes you can have empathy and attempt it prematurely. So it can reopen wounds, right? And so
Mhm.
if you don't feel safe or validated and grounded, in your own healing, um, it can feel like betrayal, not just from the person that may have done something, but betrayal of yourself because you
Yeah.
haven't had your own healing journey. So I believe it's important, like when you're ready to approach empathy and um, when your heart is ready to understand, not just for justification, but when you can think about what the offender has done, but without emotional flooding, right? So now I'm ready to have that conversation and heal. Healing then perceives the perspective or the event or what happened. Then we can get closer to going through the relationship beyond the offense. And I think that's how we heal through these moments.
Mhm.
I believe that's how it becomes in targeted intention. And, sometimes it's just saying, I'm not ready to talk.
Yeah.
I'm just not ready. And that's being more honest with yourself and then honest with the person who probably want to get through it, or maybe they've apologized, but you're still not ready. And so these type of things are just searching within, talking to God about it, and saying, you know what, now I feel like I can move forward. It's so important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a process. So for someone, for the both of you, I'll start with Amira, that is struggling with this step. What's one small, safe way they can begin to open that door to empathy? And and if you can also talk about how um, empathy towards another is also empathy for ourselves.
Sure, sure. I think it's just one, it starts really with one small step, right? And you want to start safe. Here's the thing, we don't have to feel empathy overnight. I mean, I don't think that that's going to happen right overnight. It takes time to get there. You have to first honor what you feel. You have to feel it. You have to sit with it. You have to go through that process, right? Um, but when you finally are ready to move into that space of empathy, you can just begin with that spirit of curiosity and ask yourself, even if it's asking it gently, right? Like, what might this person have been feeling or fearing when they did this to me? And so you're not excusing their behavior, you're just exploring what might have driven it. And so, like we talked about, there's certain tools that we share with you, journaling, prayer. You can pray for the courage. You can journal and write down, what was holding you back. um, and you just release that hold that the offense has on your heart. And some offenses, I know that they're so deeply rooted that we need to help. We need the help to root them out. And so it can even start with handing that
Mhm.
burden to God in prayer, or sitting it down at his feet as a way of beginning, or talking to a counselor, a therapist, or a pastor. So empathy really starts where honesty and curiosity meet, and then it's taking one step towards that healing. And I think your other question was, how can you have empathy towards someone, right? And then have empathy towards yourself. The way I see it is, when we practice compassion outward, we're also eventually feeling its echo inward. So when you
Mm,
shift how you can see the person and their story, it also shifts how you see your own story too. So there's a
mhm,
point where, like, and I know I've experienced this many times, it's like when you shift that story, you stop labeling yourself as, oh, I'm broken or I'm unworthy, but you start recognizing that you are also a human being who had just been hurt, and that you're doing your very best to heal. And so there's no right or wrong. It's just making those little small steps towards forgiveness, because forgiveness often begins, right, when we can have that act of grace towards ourselves and also towards others.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I'm just going to share a couple of comments I'm seeing here. Let's see. Annie says, I love that. I feel like sometimes in the church, people try to force forgiveness without first really letting people acknowledge and
Mhm.
sit in the hurt. Acknowledging the hurt first is so important so you can release it to God, and then God empowers you to feel empathy. Um, Alex says, it makes me think about how forgiveness is a huge part of communication. Um, Prayer is everything. So thanks for those that are just chiming in and making those comments. I appreciate hearing from you, and I do encourage those that are listening to share this component, this podcast, because it's important topic that many can identify with. Toria, some tips for someone that wants to make this first step. First they're going to recall the hurt, like we talked about in the last podcast. And the second one is this area of empathy.
So I believe, like, think of empathy as a bridge. to an altruistic gift. So it's going to open your heart to
Yeah.
steps of offering forgiveness. So think of it, forgiveness is more like a gift. I know I don't have to, but I'm going to give you this gift anyway. Um, when we
Mhm.
understand someone's humanity, um, we basically no longer view forgiveness as surrender or um, we actually look at it as more like spiritual. I call it spiritual generosity. You know, as God has forgiven me for some things that I may have done, I'm going to also extend that
Mhm.
to you. It's also freedom for both of you, right? So that first step is, I really believe of it, is just kind of thinking it as a bridge to a gift um, for the person and yourself to have freedom from what happened.
Mhm.
And one of the other things I do believe is, you know, just through the steps, we can move into recalling the hurt, you know, and emphasizing with the person. We can also transition from victimhood
Yes.
to really agency. Um, and then we remember that um, the one who hurt us is still a human being, often shaped by pain themselves. And I think this shift will soften like our emotional rigidity because we're still going through it. And it actually makes space for compassion. And it quiets the storm in your life because you know you've really gone through this. Um, and just thinking back, I really struggled with certain things in my past, just trying to understand and not, you know, and just really try to say, you know what, this person probably was doing the best they could, right? And that's what helped me grow.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Toria and Omira, for sharing from your heart. I hope it was of great, I know it's of great encouragement to those that are listening to us to take that bold step. And again, just to remind ourselves, forgiveness is not reconciliation, it's not excusing, it's not tolerating, but it is a process that leads to healing for yourself. And
Mhm.
then it could create that pathway, that bridge towards reconciliation in the cases that makes sense. Um, Toria, to wrap us up, we're gonna next time that we talk, we'll talk a little bit about that third step, which is then the altruistic gift of forgiveness. And the first one is recalling the story. The second stage that we talked about was empathy for the person that hurt you and empathy for yourself. And then the third is altruistic um, gift of forgiveness and what that looks like. So Toria is going to wrap us up sharing about our ambassador program. I'll go ahead and post on the screen a little banner that talks features what this is. Can you break this down for us?
Absolutely. One of my greatest joys is being able to connect people to what Family Bridges is doing. And so we have what's called a Team Up for Families. It allows our community of family members, friends, supporters, board members, our staffs, each of us to build a community around helping families. And what the Team Up for Families Ambassador Program, you get to join this community of people who really want to be bring awareness to what Family Bridges is doing, inspire change, help in the cycle of family trauma, which is our what our mission is. And so to get involved, there's a QR code there on the screen. You can scan the QR code. It'll lead you right to our website, which explains our ambassador program. And what our ambassadors do is they help to champion giving hope to families, you know, building, helping them to heal, to transform, empowering them through our work. And how does ambassadors do that? They give their time, their talent, and their treasure. Um, they may host events. They may be facilitators or coaches in some of our programs. There's so many ways. But I am your person to help you get started. We have some exciting things coming up for our ambassadors, and we would love to hear from you. And if you have any questions, we will be having another orientation. So go ahead and sign up. And on the third Thursday of this month, we'll have another orientation, answer questions, and get you started.
Thank you, Toria, and thank you all for spending this lunch hour. Maybe this is your lunch hour or post-lunch hour with us this afternoon, diving into this really important topic. We're going to continue in a couple weeks. Share the video with someone that in your in your environment, your network, that would benefit, would be blessed by it. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.
God bless.
God bless.